afternoon. So we actually have a second guest as well, a local Helsinki boy, Sasu Laukkonen, and he hurried here as fast as he could, so he's still wearing his chef's jacket. So Sasu just very quickly runs a great restaurant here called Chef and Sommelier, and is very much part of the community, which has been part of sort of renewing everything which has been happening here in the Nordics. What we thought we'd talk a little bit about today are the different components of the building blocks that people like Sasu and Lars have been using the past couple of years in creating what is sometimes in the outside been known as the new Nordic cuisine, but I think actually more in sort of reinventing how we're looking at food, how we're consuming food, both in your restaurants but also from a broader perspective. Now I wanted to talk a little bit about the very long-term perspective, which is not something which has always happens here at a technology conference. And finally, a little bit about the ecosystem. But maybe, first of all, Lars, head of R&D, are you mad scientist? Are you chef? What's the...
Well, I mean, in an ideal world, it's a little bit of the in-between. And I had the benefit and the interest and the good luck to work in a lot of very interesting restaurants that were sort of focused on curiosity and a bit of a slightly academic approach to cooking in my career. But as our restaurant Noma has grown into almost a monster in terms of staff, when we sit down for our sort of family meal, which is our staff meal, we're sitting about 70 people. It's allowed us to have this differentiation and sort of specialization, which is somewhat unique in the restaurant world, where you can have someone who's focused specifically on creating dishes or creating ferments for those dishes. At the restaurant, we have a team of 3 sous chefs who spend their 80 to 90 hours a week working only on creativity and innovation for the new dishes in the restaurant. So it's the way that we approach food has been to evolve in that direction, where you have this sort of crossover between a lot of traditional roles. And to that extent, the newest member of the Noma team is actually a flavor chemist from UC Davis. And that's us sort of going further down the road of breaching this gap between science and cookery. Part of the Mad Symposium, which is sort of our corporate our idea for distilling and disseminating the ideas that are behind the restaurant and putting them out on a platform which can be educational, but also sharing a lot of the knowledge that we have. That team is based off of anthropologists and historians, so the group of people that it now makes up Restaurant Noma is becoming incredibly diverse.
So how about you, Sasu? I mean, you're 39 square meters, as far as I remember, Chef and Sommelier saying.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you apply these same things, right? The same. We spoke. I think Lars has once in a while. He said, creating a dish is a full sentence for him. Mm-hmm. What is then that language? What is that alphabet? What is it that?
Well, because in different perspective, everything is different, right? So because we're a team of 5, the whole restaurant is 5 of us.
And a farm.
Well, yeah, including me. That too.
So you can see who's a very hardworking chef and who's here on a 36-hour vacation.
So, yeah, we are a restaurant of 39 square meters with 5 of us. So me, a sommelier, and 3 cooks. So no waiters, meaning every night ends with the cooks polishing the glasses, all of the tableware, because we're all part of a full cycle, right? Yeah. So with the creativity, of course, I sort of run it. I'm the one everything checks through, but I want everyone to be able to be creative. It could be my sommelier for that note. He could come up with a wine saying like, you have to make a dish for this. And then we just start working. So we gather ideas from everyone, and if there are no ideas, then I just go crazy. You know, I don't feel bad that the guys aren't putting up on ideas. You know, it doesn't matter. What matters is that we have creativity. So I just try to feed it.
How do you generate new ideas? Because often, when you're looking for new ideas or inspiration, what we sort of talk about, and we talk about sort of creativity and inspiration in these very broad brushstrokes, because it's something that we focus on a lot in terms of how do we make ourselves smarter? How do we make ourselves just better at what we do in that aspect? You start looking to other professions, whether it's painting or poetry or anything that's a sort of creative endeavor. And the conclusion we've sort of loosely come to is that creativity is the application of intuition against wisdom, in the sense that you need to sort of have this repertoire of knowledge that you can sort of have as sort of stacks of index cards, and then your intuition is how you sort of slot new things together.
Sure. Yeah. I've kind of been a weirdo, maybe. I've been a bit different always.
That's part of being a kitchen.
Yeah, but you know, a lot of us chefs aren't actually really self-motivated, if you know what I mean. Like, you need a kick from someone to be able to find creativity within yourself. I've always been like the guy who's touching a little bit of everything and then seeing what I like and then just really pushing. So I still do the same. So I'm feeding myself with pictures, with articles, with everything on like Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, just flashing through. And then suddenly I go, wait a minute, what was that? And then I look at it and I go, okay. So I see something very definite. It could be one of Lars's tests, right? And then I transfer it to a totally different context that actually is more in my life, in my cycle or my kitchen. So I'm very kind of, the other side of the story being, I just stand, stop, and go, I've never done this before. Could you do what we just talked about, the cabbage? Could you do it like that?
Yeah.
What does it taste like? So it's more curiosity as well.
There's also a bit of sampling, it sounds.
Yeah.
Sampling of lots of other ideas.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, within this team of 5, we conduct about 50 to 100 tests per month while working. So just anything.
Yeah. Maybe actually, because the head chef of Noma likes to joke that I have a gray hair for every failed dish that we've been working on, which is, I'm going to run out of failures soon. But
well, I have no hair then.
One thing we also trying to get better at, and we do get better at as we get more mature, I think, as cooks, is how you kind of recover from failure and how you assimilate that into something positive. Because when you're working in a kitchen, you're working 80, 90 hours. And at least for me, where my primary function is to develop positive dishes for the restaurant. And if you take those 320 hours a month, and I have 6 positive dishes that come out of that amount of work, there's a lot of, it's failing 99% of the time. And actually, the way that we've gotten better is sort of to somehow be able to not let it bear down on you, but pull the good things out of it. And actually, a dish that you were mentioning before was kind of a cobbling of 5 different failures into something more of a successful. But
yeah, I agree.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the. So how do you actually view that as for guests coming in, right? You know, one thing is this.
Well, we don't describe it as here's your dish of failures.
No, that's not what I mean. But you know, sort of so you know, specifically in. So I feel that one of the great things about dining with either of you is being challenged, being moved a little bit. You know, and my 9-year-old son can now tell me if an ant tastes old. And that's because of you having stuck one in my mouth at some point. Yeah. So this constant moving. I mean, there's one thing we were talking to somebody before, and unfortunately, the guy had no clue of who Noma was, right? What restaurant Noma was, and so sometimes it's this, you have this tower up there, and how do you translate these things for the individual guest?
Well, I think when we try and, hopefully what we're doing is providing a little bit of novel experience to our guests in a way that's primarily delicious, but can also engage them. A lot of times we have like a wide number of our guests say that a dish reminds them of a childhood experience, even though it's something that I've never tasted before and they've never tasted before, but sort of cobblestone can bring an emotional response. But it's also about kind of breaking down cultural stereotypes. And in the instance of like the ant, it's when we first started using ants as food, that was because a Brazilian chef, Alex Atala, had come up to us in a sort of the Flemish Primitives, which is a symposium. And he said, and this guy is known as quite a prankster and a jokester, and he said, guys, come over, you gotta try this. And we look into this pot, and the color of the liquid is this fluorescent yellow-green, at the color of antifreeze from a car, and floating on top is a thick layer of gigantic 2-centimeter ants. And I said, I'm not eating that, Alex. He said, no, you have to try. And I actually believed in him briefly and tried one of the ants, and it was like an epiphany. It's like something just opens up in your mind, because this ant tasted like ginger or lemongrass, or this like somehow like beautiful melding of the two. And the fact that you could find this flavor in something I had never considered before as food just changed everything in a way, because all of a sudden as a chef you think you work within a certain toolbox, a certain framework of ideas that somehow you've learned since you were a kid starting to work in kitchens. These are what we use as food, and these are the ingredients that you have at your disposal.
These are the weights, these are the ways the recipes are built.
And so all of a sudden when you see a new ingredient in, like, which is an ant, and so this is part of like a very small spectrum of insects, it's like all of a sudden we hear like, wow, I have like a whole, it's like seeing in color for the first time, or seeing the ocean for the first time, or something like that, where all of a sudden your world changes. But with that ant, it's also very funny, because I was just in Zimbabwe working with a non-profit down there, and there they eat tons and tons of insects, caterpillars 5 centimeters long, sort of what they call tree prawns, which are an even bigger, more aggressive insect. And I was foraging around on the ground, and I pick up an ant and I eat it, and everyone's shocked. And this guy has just cooked me like a porridge of these giant caterpillars. Will not taste an ant because he's scared of it. So there's this cultural stigmas and cultural barriers that we're always just trying to break down in terms of kind of changing things. And I actually think that the dish that we were just talking about the cabbage roasted, is a great example of how you can sort of just shake off everything that you were sort of taught about how you cook a cabbage, or how a vegetable needs to be cooked as opposed to meat, and how you can then throw both of those things away and approach it in a completely new way.
Yeah, and the other thing is, because I'm pretty much the same, but a lot of my sort of epiphanies have come through the farming, tasting parts of plants that normally aren't maybe used for food. So it's become more a no-waste theory put into sort of, we make vinegars with leaves of something, and then this vinegar you can take forward in a dish to a total different level. Or you grow a plant for flowers, but when you taste the leaves, they taste of oysters. And since we don't have oysters here, we don't grow any in our waters. So now I have oysters through the farm. Right? So it's just about seeing things differently, being curious, and then just using it to the advantage, I think.
All the stuff which is in front of us, but wasn't in the supermarket.
Sure.
Trays. Yeah. So.
Or even in a cooking technique, when something happens in a very completely unexpected direction, it's about seeing the positive in what happened. We had a dish of roasted beets with where our cooks called this forever beets because you had to stand there rotating a beet in the oven for 2 hours every 5 minutes, keeping an eye on it while you were supposedly doing all the other 100 things that you need to do within those 2 hours. And the beet turns to get this lovely, meaty, dense, leathery texture to it that has this amazing licorice tones and very, very superb. But the whole thing came out of a mistake where I asked a very young cook to hard roast a beet, and he hard roasted it way too hard. But those in the test kitchen said, well, let's just scrape off that kind of ash around it and try filleting it like almost it was like a fish, and something happened.
Right. I remember that dish very, very, very well. Thank you.
Can we switch a little bit to, so what's interesting is, we're at a Nordic technology conference here, and I spend a lot of time here in Helsinki, spend a lot of time in Copenhagen, and the connections are pretty weak. You guys as chefs, are constantly at each other. You're constantly eating with each other. You're constantly sharing ideas. You're constantly showing each other how you do stuff. What's the why is this? Where does that come from? This seems like a pretty new phenomena as well.
Yeah, it is. I mean, concerning Finland, this is only me saying, but I'm still saying we're 5 years late from the other Nordic countries in this, and in a lot of things. But still, it's starting seriously here now, where the young chefs, it's the new generation that's brought it into Helsinki. So guys may be 20, 22, 24 years old, 26 years old, setting up shop, and they don't fear asking for advice. They just ring you up and say, chef, can we meet? And I'm like, yeah, dude, come over.
I want to learn.
And then you just start talking, and they spread it out on the table, and they say, I want my own restaurant. How do I find finance? And it works very differently. But with the old school, this is my recipe.
Exactly.
A big change.
Yeah, and that's been such a positive change, because when we travel to each other's restaurants or we meet each other in, say, places like this, it's just really positive. We start talking about food, and everyone's very, very open, and there's this huge cross-pollination of chefs from, within our region, but also across the world. That's really improved things, tremendously. With me and Massimo Vittorio talking, he'll talk about this risotto where he's cooked the rice, and then the way he's made the risottos, he's cooked the Parmesan, but then he's split the Parmesan into a milk and then used the oil in this and then reconstituted. And it gives you just these beautiful images kind of are really a result of information sharing, and that's really changed our craft, I think.
Yeah, and I think, well, for me, MAD has been one of the biggest agents for the connections overseas, because it's gathered so many people together for years, right? And it's always a place where you meet people, so everyone's sort of in that mode anyway. It's been really cool.
Yeah. So this is Noma. The king is dead. Long live the king. Just take very quickly, each of you, like sort of the 100-year perspective on food, on dining. Well, actually, not on dining. Screw that. On eating, on food, on how that pulls our culture forward. Is it even more of this? Is it is Zimbabwe the inspiration, the next inspiration? Is that what's the responsibility that you guys as chefs and researchers have?
Well, I think for us, we definitely have a very long game in mind, and we see that starting to unfold in terms of being part of a growing community. And Copenhagen's really been a place that's changed dramatically in the past 10 years in terms of having a lot of young chefs really putting themselves out there and really being inspiring. So Copenhagen has become an incredible destination to eat. But even more than that, we felt the need to find a way to make that, like basically take that another step, another level up? And how do you connect communities? How do you teach chefs to be more clever about what they do? How do we educate people about food systems and the problem in food systems? And what is it that we can do? And how do we take what's kind of the ethos of admittedly an elite restaurant and share that with a greater community? Because you do feel this very strongly that with the attention that we have, this attention's given us a bit of leverage. And so what do we use that leverage for? Do we use the leverage for opening up 20 different Nomas around the world? You know, that's, to us, that's very empty. And that's a very short-sighted way of where we should be looking towards the future. Instead, I mean, we're closing a restaurant and we're moving to a new one. We're not closing, by the way. We are just relocating. The purpose for that relocation is to find a space where we can allow ourselves to evolve in a way that makes more sense to us. But in terms of the broader vision, a lot of it is about finding a way to get feet onto the ground and to take some of the ideas that we have been having and have been positive for us in Restaurant Noma and apply them to a larger audience. And well, I just came back from Zimbabwe 2 days ago, and that's something a project that we're trying to assist a woman who's using food to basically lift up battered women and orphans in Zimbabwe so that they can become self-sufficient. And so we're trying to apply or teach them some of the things that we've learned over the past 12 years and make that sort of a positive way that we can interact with the world, because having a community of chefs where we can talk and inspire each other has been very positive for us, and we feel that kind of growing community can just be something that we can make a lot of other communities better in terms of not just, you know, very beautiful, expensive restaurants, but can be applied to school lunches, or we're setting up another program for basically community food trucks in Copenhagen. That's going to be a way for people to have like very, very cheap lunches, and something that we're also looking to employ in cities like Detroit in the US. So this basically taking the knowledge we've built over a decade or so and getting it out there.
Yeah, but you're also,
very
you're also
short, just
teaching
to wrap it up,
kids.
Sasu.
You're teaching kids with the wild stuff, Wildmad.
Yeah,
right?
and then there's another there's another program called Vildmad, which is wild food in Danish, which is about putting in a kind of a foraging program into school systems where it'll teach the kids how to interact with their landscape and again have a little bit more knowledge and connective through food to their surroundings.
Great.
It's lovely.
Thank you very much, Sasu. Thank you very much, Lars. And I'm certain that Sasu needs to go into service. Lars has the day off.
He's coming for dinner.
He's going to be around. Grab a hold of him. Both of these gentlemen have fantastic stories to tell, so wish we'd had more time here on stage. Thank you.
Thank you.